This is We Happy Few, an open-world story-driven game that has a focus on stealth or combat. There's 70 achievements, and this is the story of how I got all of them. And it's another fabulous day in Wellington Wells. The sun is shining, and the weather is overcast, only slightly rainy. So best bring your umbrella out as you stroll through town. Wakey, wakey, everyone. Now, we've had quite the routine schedule for a while, but today we have a special new broadcast planned. So gather in front of your tellies and get ready for today's exciting new broadcast. Arthur's story begins at his job, where he either approves or censors documents. He comes across an old newspaper that features him and his brother, and he begins to remember uncomfortable things. Arthur grabs his joy and goes to take it, but stops and contemplates taking it. Joy is a pill that, among other things, suppresses unpleasant memories and releases endorphins, making one joyful. A choice is given, should he take his joy or not. I choose not to take the joy, and Arthur begins to remember Percy, his brother. He waits a while and his boss, Victoria Bing, comes into his office asking what he's been up to. Victoria invites him to Peach's birthday party before she finds his joy pills tossed into the ground and questions if he's been taking them, which he assures her he is. Arthur goes to finish his work, but his power cell is empty, leading him needing to find a new one. Once he finds the new power cell, he powers the machine and continues his work. I decided to accept the newspaper talking about him and his brother before deciding for a few unimportant documents. Arthur stands up and begins to head towards the party. On his way, he sees a doctor giving a guy an injection of joy, a clear warning for Arthur of what will happen if he stays off his joy. During this, his view of the world also shifts, slowly removing the filtered joy placed on him and revealing the world's actual state, before snapping back to the cheery version. Arthur enters the party room, where he is invited to smash the piñata, which turned out to actually be a rat. Victoria realizes Arthur is actually off his joy and calls the bobbies on him, calling him a downer, a person who doesn't take joy. Arthur escapes through the vents by climbing up on some objects. In this game, by jumping near reachable ledges, Arthur can climb up to reach higher ground. Once he gets into the hallway, the bobbies find him and begin to chase him. Arthur escapes into the tunnels where the bobbies knock him out, then promptly leave him be. This gets me the first achievement of the run, Downer, for completing Arthur's intro. Arthur wakes up, alone within the tunnels, and needs to find a way out. He finds a room with some bobby pins, which he can fashion into a lockpick. This game has a simple crafting system. Whilst inside your inventory, you can find a screen that shows the recipes you have unlocked. Some recipes require workbenches to work, but most things can be crafted outright. Arthur then finds a note relating to Prudence, one of his coworkers who ran off in the same way Arthur is going. He soon finds a locked door, but it could be unlocked with the lockpick he made earlier. Lockpicks do break pretty easily, but thankfully, as long as you have enough bobby pins, you can craft lockpicks as you go to pick a door without having to open the crafting menu. Once he enters the room, he finds an electro lock shocker, which can be used to disable electronics such as keycard readers. Not far from the shocker, Arthur finds a memory. There are a ton of these memories scattered about the game, about 44 of them, and they give lore tidbits about the past. There's no achievement for collecting all of them, so I'll talk a bit more about finding them when I obtain the last one. Arthur soon finds a pneumatic stash, which can store his items and acts as a global infinite storage. What's nice about the stash is that workbenches will draw items from the stash as well as ones from Arthur's inventory. Next to the stash is a switch to power the track access hatch. Arthur is currently within one of the game's many shelters, which always has a bed, stash, workbenches, and a track access hatch, which act as this game's form of fast travel. You can travel to any of the hatches at most locations as long as you aren't in combat or trespassing, and you'll be transported there and time will pass in-game. As time passes, active status effects and debuffs will decrease or increase depending on the effect, which includes Arthur's fatigue, hunger, and thirst. While on the subject, Arthur does need to eat, sleep, and drink. If he doesn't, his hunger and thirst will both cut his max stamina, and his tiredness will give him stamina fatigue. However, if these needs are taken care of, Arthur will receive a buff instead. If he's well fed, he'll have more max stamina, if he's well hydrated, he'll consume less stamina, and if he's well rested, he'll fight better. On top of all this, there's different consumables that give their own buffs in addition to filling the hunger and or thirst meter. Arthur then uses the shocker to hack a keypad, opening the door. Once Arthur goes through the door, the first combat encounter ensues. Even though Arthur is a literal twig, he can still pack quite the punch, and the attacker goes down easily after a few swings. Inside the room, Arthur finds a button which turns the power back on, lowering the ladder which would take him back to the surface. Once Arthur takes the ladder, he finds himself within the Garden District. Unfortunately for him, the way out of Wellington Wells is at the bridge in the Parade District, which he just got chased out of. Arthur thinks of a way out and realizes he can follow the old train tracks at the nearby train station to get to the bridge. Walking for a bit, Arthur comes across a telephone booth with a ringing phone. Answering it gives him a cryptic message before it goes silent. Arthur soon finds a water pump which he can use to fill canteens. Canteens can be found throughout the world and can be filled with water to drink whenever you want, so it's useful to have a few. Arthur then finds a bridge that he needs to take to get to the train station, but it's unpowered so he can't cross. He talks to this guy, David Livingstone, who tells him he won't be able to cross the bridge without a power cell and a key card from one of the bobbies. Thankfully, David has the key card and will trade it to Arthur if Arthur gets his stolen medals from a nearby camp, which also probably has a power cell. So that's where Arthur begins to go. He finds a way into the camp via a backdoor entrance and enters the camp. Once inside, he finds an elevator and takes it down, but gets stopped by 2 guards who tell him to empty his pockets into the chest, then promptly send him down to a fighting arena. When he gets down to the arena, they welcome him in before giving him his opponent, Danny Defoe, someone who doesn't like Arthur because of a review Arthur gave him. Soon, 2 weapons lower from the ceiling, one padded, one not. This game has 3 types of weapons: light, moderate, and heavy. Moderate and heavy weapons deal lethal final blows, killing the enemy. Light weapons, including Arthur's fist, don't do this, they just knock an enemy unconscious. There's no real benefit to killing an enemy or knocking them unconscious, just each one matches a certain playstyle. Arthur grabs the padded weapon and a guy on the sidelines teaches him how to block. As an enemy is about to attack, blocking will negate the damage of the attack. You can prepare for a block by holding the weapon in front of you, but if you time it correctly, you can perform a perfect block, which slightly staggers an enemy. The same guy also teaches Arthur how to shove, which is an easier way to stagger opponents. After Arthur shoves Danny a few times, Danny goes down, and soon Arthur faces 2 enemies at once. By using everything he learned, Arthur goes into critical condition. While in this state, if he doesn't heal, he'll die. Thankfully, he had a healing item and was able to top off to prevent death. Soon both enemies go down, and Arthur returns to the elevator, being sent down, then forced to fall below. It's here where the first use of a Jimmy bar occurs. They're similar to lockpicks, as they can easily be crafted. They can open up several things, like phone boxes and vents, and by using the bar on a vent, Arthur is able to start his escape. Upon exiting the vent, Arthur gets his first skill point. These are obtained by completing quests and are spent on the skill tree in the inventory. Arthur has 3 skill trees: Combat, Stealth, and Super Duper. The left side shows Arthur's special character perks and debuffs that he always has, such as being faster and being able to blend in easier. The game forces you to spend the first 3 points on stealth takedowns, which also knocks enemies unconscious. After purchasing the skill, the game wants you to test it on this enemy. Never mind, Arthur punches him to unconsciousness. In the next room, Arthur properly does a stealth takedown on an enemy. Entering the adjoining room, Arthur finds one of the many throwable tools the game has to offer: glass bottles. These can be thrown to distract enemies, moving them to better positions for takedowns. There's also a bunch of other tools that can be brought down to 2 categories: distractables and harmables, which distracts and harms enemies respectively, though some of the harmful ones can knock enemies unconscious. I don't use these too often, as there aren't many situations where they're needed, but the bottles are pretty good throughout the game. The main reason you'd want to distract an enemy is to prevent them from noticing you, which, if you're caught doing something suspicious, like trespassing, an indicator will appear above an enemy, slowly rising until it reaches its max and they begin to attack you. As long as you get out of their line of sight, the indicator will slowly go down. Even if they're attacking you, hiding will eventually get them to stop and go back to neutral. Instead of taking down the enemy stealthily, Arthur goes in swinging, taking out both enemies with his fists. Arthur then picks his way into this room where he grabs David's medals. After exploring the room a bit more, Arthur finds the power cell and heads out of the building, picking up his stuff before leaving. Upon leaving, Arthur finds some bushes with yellow flowers, which makes him harder to see unless an enemy bumps into him. After taking care of some enemies, Arthur finds a rose of Gilead, which if he finds 2 petals, he can craft into some healing balm, which heals for some health. Arthur then begins to head in the direction to where David went, which lands him in a town full of wastrels who don't seem to like Arthur's presence. A sane person gets Arthur into the church and tells him that she'll tell him how to survive, in exchange for his socks. Once the exchange is made, she tells him to tear up his suit to look like one of them. In this game, your appearance matters, so wearing different clothing can get you into different areas without fuss. So Arthur tears up his suit before giving David his medals, who in return gives the keycard. Once Arthur leaves the church, all the wastrels ignore him, allowing him to get to the bridge. Arthur places in the power cell and swipes the card, which opens the way to the bridge. Unfortunately, the way forward is blocked by a downer detector, which would sound an alarm summoning a spanker if Arthur goes through without taking joy. So he goes through it, but thankfully the spanker, the Tesla coil that would have shocked him, breaks down, allowing him to pass safely. As Arthur explores a new area, he comes across a strange building. By prying open one of the windows, Arthur finds a switch which powered something elsewhere in the building. By prying another building, he finds what that switch powered, a puzzle, which is solved by simply checking which one is correct, then switching the incorrect ones and repeating until it's complete. This opens the way to a shelter, where Arthur turns this wheel to activate the power in the shelter before flipping the switch to open track access. While on the way to the train station, Arthur finds a group of people holding a chef hostage, so after he beats up the enemies, he finds a key and rescues the chef, who could make him a stew daily, though this is the last time Arthur would ever see this chef. Arthur finally finds a train station and uses the front entrance. He sees some head boys blowing up an entrance into the station and uses that to get inside. While inside, he removes some planks before falling down into the lower tracks of the station. Arthur finds a new tool here, a torch, which has a battery but provides decent light. Arthur goes into a back room and finds a replacement for a switch handle and soon finds where that replacement goes. After solving a puzzle where he flips the switches and according to this poster, the power turns back on. Once he goes past the door, he begins to remember a bit more about his brother. There was a train going to Germany, as the Germans succeeded in taking over Britain during World War II in this world's lore, and at some point the Authority Project began, which was to send every child under 13 years of age to Germany. Arthur promised to go on that train with his brother, but ended up not going as Arthur was over 13, so wasn't allowed on the train. He even told the Bobby he wanted to go on the train, but they didn't make the rules anymore, so Arthur couldn't go. Eventually, Arthur comes across a cave-in, where a group of head boys ambush him. Arthur quickly hides and waits till they ignore him, then lockpicks the door to escape. Upon exiting, someone from Arthur's past tries to attack him, Ollie Starkey, his old neighbor. Once Arthur gets Ollie to remember him, they make a deal that Arthur would turn off the power at a nearby memorial camp, then Ollie would help Arthur get out of Wellington Wells. Ollie tells him to meet at the bunker at the memorial camp and that he'd take care of the soldiers at the bridge. Once the conversation is over, Arthur begins to head for the camp. On the way, I use some skill points I've gotten through quests to buy my next skill, Buff, getting Arthur 50% more max health. Upon reaching the bridge, it seems Ollie took care of these soldiers by getting them drunk, so it was an easy stroll into the outer camp, and Arthur quickly found the bunker Ollie was in. Ollie explains to Arthur his plan. Arthur needs to get a key from the general to get to the power room to shut everything down. Luckily, there was a nearby fence, so that was Arthur's ticket in. Before leaving, I pick up a note which gives a quest to investigate an illegal distillery within the campground. Being that this is an open world game, there are a bunch of side quests, each with their own reward. However, I won't be going over every single side quest unless it rewards something helpful, is related to an achievement, or is important to the story. With that out of the way, I get the next skill here, Buff here, which gives 50% more max health. After climbing up to a roof, Arthur jumps the fence, landing into a tank, which is made of paper mache. Yep, the tanks are actually fake, all of them. This news was disturbing to Arthur as the train he was supposed to get on only happened because of the tanks, as they thought it was useless to revolt. Now inside the camp proper, Arthur has to be sneaky, as if one of these watchtower lights spots him, it'll sound an alarm. Arthur makes his way into the general's office by lockpicking the side door. Inside, Arthur finds a book. There are many of these books scattered about the world, and they give passive bonuses when read. Behind this painting, Arthur finds a music sheet which tells him to play note chord note on a piano. Playing it reveals the key taped to a wall and near it a hatch. Arthur quickly makes his way into the generator room and sabotages the power by turning off these switches. This sounds an alarm, so Arthur rushes back to the hatch in the journal's office. This puts him right outside the camp, and Arthur begins to head back to Ollie, upset with him as Ollie most likely knew and left out the part that turning off the power would trigger an alarm. On the way, I pick up my next perk after completing a quest, Herbalist, which makes healing items 50% more effective. Arthur makes it to the back of the train station and rings the bell to enter. He then uses a few elevators before confronting Ollie, telling him about the tanks. Arthur also realizes he lied about his birthday to get off the train. Ollie decides to help Arthur by giving him this doohickey that he can use to light his way past another bridge to get into Maidenholm. After the talk, I get the second achievement, Mother of All Victories, for completing the Band of Brothers quest. With the device in hand, Arthur begins to head his way to the bridge. Once Arthur reaches the bridge, he does exactly what Ollie told him to do, pose as a bridge inspector, which lets him get into the waiting room of the bridge. After taking a number and waiting, he takes an elevator down and begins to relearn how to conform into the proper society of Wellington Wells. This is the first time Arthur takes Joy since the beginning of the game. Joy changes a lot of aspects about the world, such as the way it looks and the way Arthur walks and runs. Joy doesn't last forever, and if Arthur takes a large enough dose, he'll become depressed once it wears off, easily alerting people that he hasn't taken any joy. Thankfully, this depressed state doesn't last long and can be waited out, and once it's over, people will be none the wiser to Arthur's downer status. Joy is also easily accessible as there's mood boosts like this one all about the village. However, taking a lot of joy isn't good, as taking too much can cause memory problems that makes everyone hostile and doesn't allow you to fight well. If the joy meter is filled, the world will become further distorted, and you won't be able to do any fighting, but people will aggro onto you, so you just need to wait it out. By walking through the downer detector, Arthur is able to access the theater where the face of the society, Uncle Jack, talks about how to conform in Wellington Wells. After the showing, Arthur heads down where a Bobby tells him some additional rules. Jumping, crouching, and sprinting isn't seen as orderly behavior, and doing it will raise suspicions of the Wellies. Afterwards, Arthur begins to take a quiz that tests if he's up to standard. After passing with flying colors, the quiz starts again. Arthur isn't having any of that, so he escapes through a vent where Bobby congratulates him and warns him about the new curfew. Arthur is welcomed back into the village where I get my next achievement, not in Kansas anymore. Arthur just needs to get to the parade, but he needs a letter of transit which is on his desk in the parade. But he thinks the old government building printing office might have one, so begins to head there. Within the village there are new threats. Spanker TVs, which if it notices Arthur is off his joy, will count to 3 before trying to electrocute him. Thankfully it has a limited range, and just walking away from it easily counters it. There's also the Peepers, which is an aerial machine that also shocks Arthur if its suspicion gets too high. Arthur decides it would be best to open the track access within Maidenholm, so he quickly finds it. Entering the hatch reveals the entire area to be flooded and electrified. By carefully jumping on elevated platforms, Arthur shuts off the power, then drains the room and turns the power back on. He flips the switch and another track access is available. After the hatch, Arthur heads to the Church of St. Genesis, where a group of people who have turned Simon Says into a religion are held up. They're doing a contest, but they can't start it without Nick Lightbearer, and ask if Arthur would go get him. His house isn't too far away, but Arthur would need to figure out a way to get inside. By climbing on some scaffolding, Arthur enters the nearby house, which lets him access more scaffolding to reach Nick's house. Unfortunately, there isn't much Arthur can do here until he gets a few electroshockers, and when trying to leave, Arthur dies, or as this game puts it, gone on holiday. Thankfully, this didn't load me back that far, and Arthur continued his journey, going to come back once he had a few shockers. Finally, Arthur arrives at the printing office, but it's boarded up, so he needed to find another way in. By taking this door to an alley, Arthur comes across his childhood friend Sally Boyle. They greet each other at first, and Sally notices Arthur is off his joy, but she also is, so doesn't alert anyone. Arthur explains his plan for getting out, which Sally mentions she's close with General Bing, which seemed to tick something off in Arthur, turning this reunion sour. Arthur turns around, but has a change of heart, wanting to make things right with Sally, but she was already gone. In order to talk with her again, he'd need to go to her house. Once Arthur decides on doing this, some plowboys ambush him, but Arthur just runs off instead of dealing with them. Out of the alley, a Bobby talks with Arthur and tells him the bridge to St. George is under renovations and only Dr. Faraday can fix them. But she was moved to a secret location that was only known by the Bobby headquarters. So Arthur goes there. Luckily it was nearby, so Arthur talks to the duty officer and lies his way in. When trying to go up the elevator, Arthur's mistaken for Percy by Chief Inspector Peters, but the conversation is ended by the elevator doors closing. At the records office, Arthur talks to this Bobby, but he's no help, so Arthur decides to break in and steal the information. He gets in through a vent and finds the address in a well-sorted filing cabinet. Faraday is located in Ludd's home in the Garden District. On Arthur's way out, he got several shockers, so he could now continue trying to get to Nick Lightbearer. On the way out of the HQ, Arthur has an idea on how to get into Ludd's home. A Bobby, who was supposed to check up on Dr. Faraday, went to the Reform Club instead, so Arthur could get his ID to get into Ludd's home. So Arthur goes there first. He needed to wait until nighttime, but once it was, he broke into the club and grabbed a disguise. He also grabbed the next skill here, Big Game Hunter, which would let Arthur use stealth takedowns on Bobbies and Joy Doctors. After equipping the disguise, it wasn't long until he had the ID, which gave me my next achievement, that kind of game. With the shockers Arthur got from the Bobby headquarters, he heads back to Nick's house, where he hacks open this door which had Nick's wig and a mask in it. Heading downstairs, Arthur disarms his electrified doorknob before disabling Nick's security system, which lets him get downstairs and talk with Nick. Arthur quickly notices how not all there Nick is and suggests for him to drink tea or to take a bath, which Nick goes to the bathroom to do. When entering the bathroom, Nick is holding a power cell, which he tosses and catches around before missing and having a shocking consequence. With Nick dead, Arthur decides to pose as him for the Simon Says event, so he takes his key and grabs his outfit from the earlier dressing room. After putting on Nick's outfit, he heads to the church and begins to lead the game as Simon Says. By continuously tricking the contestants into doing something when he doesn't say Simon Says, they all get zapped down, until it malfunctions and ends the event by vaporizing the finalist. Arthur quickly shuts down the power, then takes the medal for himself, which makes people less suspicious of him. Continuing to find Dr. Faraday, Arthur arrives at the bridge and talks to the Bobby who asks for credentials which Arthur has. The Bobby warns Arthur to be careful around people who have contracted the plague and gives him some medicine for if he does catch it. After the conversation, the Bobby opens the gate and Arthur walks into Ludd's home, where he immediately sees the body of someone who died of the plague. Arthur decides it'd be a good idea to find shelter in Ludd's home, so he begins to head towards its location. Once he enters, he finds the entire shelter to be littered with plague-infected racials. They seem to have an aversion to light, so by turning the power back on, they all skedaddle. Arthur covers some holes in the walls where they got in or out and turns the switch to power the access hatch. Arthur arrived at Faraday's house, where houseboys Roger and James were arguing about how one broke the water valve. Arthur talks with James, and James asks if Arthur could fetch a replacement valve. The valve isn't that far away, and once James fixes it, Arthur has access to Faraday's lab, where he goes up to talk with her. Faraday talks to Arthur and says she could help him with the bridge, but he needs to help her out of her own house first, which she would need a few things to do it. First, she needed a bucket of modeling, which with this handy device, Arthur could get from a nearby house. On the way out of the house, I get the next skill, Tireless, which removes the negative effects from not eating, drinking, or sleeping. After Arthur gets to modeling, he returns, and Faraday asks him to extract some mechanical parts from 3 cars scattered about Love's home. Arthur picks up the extractor and gets the first bit from a car near Faraday's house. While walking to the treehouse, Arthur finds a hill where once he cleansed the doors of his perception, walked into a cult worshipping a yam. Yep, that's a sentence. After listening to the sermon and banging the drums, they all just kind of die. Arthur then talks to the yam, who offers him 3 gifts, one that lets him eat rotten food, one that increases his max health by 10%, and one that increases his stamina regen by 20%. I chose the stamina one not because of any bias, I swear, but because I really like sprinting from place to place. After all that, Arthur finds himself heading towards the treehouse again. Along the way, I get the next skill, Smooth Talker, which makes talking to NPCs reduce their suspicion for twice as long. Arriving at the treehouse, Arthur greets a man named Johnny Bolden, who wants Arthur to retrieve a secret agent named Peachy, who's just a doll. Arthur doesn't have time for that, so he extracts a nearby car for parts. After this, I upgrade the next skills, Tippy Toes, which makes Arthur sprinting silent, and OU, which allows Arthur to run, jump, and crouch in proper society without gaining suspicion. Arriving at a train station, Arthur extracts the last mechanical bits Faraday needs, and promptly returns to her. Faraday thanks him and tells Arthur to meet her back here in one day, where she would help him. Arthur goes to wait at a bench. Okay, you know what, it might be a good idea to go ahead and check in today instead. Well, Faraday's gone, but she did leave a note telling Arthur how to fix the bridge, and it's just turning it off and on again. Cool. Arthur had everything he needed, so he heads back to the village, but not before I get my next skill, Buffius, which increases max health by yet another 50%. Back at the bridge to the village, a doctor checks to make sure he doesn't have the plague, which he doesn't, so he's allowed in. Arthur wanders about and finds a shady dealer selling a boiler suit which would prove useful in the future, so he wears it for the time being. It proved immediately helpful as it let Arthur access the bridge's reset panel to fix it, allowing Arthur to get into St. George's home. However, this is where Arthur got the first memory loss from taking too much joy, which thankfully can be waited out. Once it's over, Arthur enters the bridge and plays a little game of Simon Says before entering St. George's home. This area introduces 2 new threats, the Joy Doctors, who are able to literally smell if Arthur has or hasn't taken joy and will become easily suspicious if they catch a whiff of Arthur off his joy. There's also the Headmistresses, which act similar to the Spanker TVs, just in a far larger radius. As Arthur heads to Sally's home, I upgrade the next skill, Iron Fist, which lets unarmed attacks have a chance to stun an enemy. While looking for Sally's house, Arthur stumbles across the shelter of this area. Within, there's a bad gas leak that needs to be taken care of. Thankfully, there is a gas mask in a storage room, which lets Arthur walk through dangerous chemicals without taking damage. He fixes a leaking pipe before flushing out the room with the toxic leak by turning on the power, allowing him to power the hatch and claim another shelter. Arthur soon reaches Sally's house, but the front door is jammed, so he enters through the back. Arthur is far nicer to Sally this time, and they agree on a deal. Sally will get the letter for Arthur, and Arthur will get a bottle of cod liver oil for Sally. They kiss? Oh, okay, seems like I'm the only one surprised by this. Moving on, Sally mentioned that Anton Verluck would have some cod liver oil at his laboratory, so that's Arthur's new destination. Arriving at the labs, a Bobby tells Arthur that there was an incident so they couldn't let people in. Arthur tries to plead that he's from the press, but a Bobby states he would need a press pass if he wanted in. Luckily, Arthur used to work for the Au Courant and could get a press pass from there. Before leaving and heading towards the Au Courant, I get a new skill, Tank, which makes Arthur take 15% less damage from several sources. Arthur arrives at his old office and sees his former boss, who states there's no job for him right now, but tells him an interesting tidbit about one of the reporters, Gemma, who's working on a very interesting article. Gemma wasn't at her desk, so Arthur decides to go to her house, as if Gemma's vanished, he could get his job and with it the press pass. Along the way, I get the next skill, Pack-a-Wallop, which increases all melee damage by 15%. Arthur soon finds himself at Gemma's house, but worryingly, the alarms were blaring. Investigating further, someone had broken in. After turning off the alarm, Arthur sees Gemma getting taken away by 2 Joy Doctors, and decides to figure out what was so interesting she found out to be taken away. He notices some doctors snooping through her stuff, so he locks himself away in her study, where he finds what Gemma was looking at, though it was unfinished. He quickly escapes before deciding to head to the Modeling and Regulation unit. As Arthur travels, I grab the next skill, Body Snatcher, which makes carrying and searching bodies twice as fast. Arriving at an alley which would take him to the unit, Arthur messes with some pipes, accidentally blowing stuff up, then grabs the key to head underground. Going down, he notices the place is ablaze, so he has to figure out a way around. Once he gets across, he flips a few switches to turn on the power, then has to figure out a way across this electrified floor, which he learns an object could disrupt it. By tossing any body onto the static floor, it discharges, allowing him to get into this room with the Jubilator. After climbing up and finding the missing evidence Gemma was looking for, he rides the Jubilator as the place begins to collapse. Eventually, he has to open up more of the track before continuing the ride, which abruptly ends after an explosion sends him down to the depths of the facility. In order to get out of here, Arthur would have to flip 3 power switches. Before leaving this room, I grabbed the next skill, Sneak Thief, which gives +2 uses to the Jimmy Bar and additional use of disarming tools. As he goes to the main room, a maniac uses the Jubilator as a weapon and roams up and down the main strip to the different rooms. He first enters this car wash room, where after turning this valve to stop the steam, he's able to flip the first switch. He then heads over to a different maintenance room where he turns a few valves, then switches on another power switch. He then heads over to communications headquarters, where he heads up some lifts and flips the final switch. He goes through the escape hatch, then gets thrown into a fight against the Jubilator. After fleeing to a side room, Arthur finds some shock grenades, which he tosses at the vehicle, bringing it down and saving both him and this guy, who gives him additional note regarding this whole debacle. Finally, Arthur leaves, and on his way to the Okeron, he comes across a veteran's house. He finds a way in through the back, then sneaks his way to the veteran, who asks him to go to his brother's house and deliver a message to end a feud. Arriving at the house, the brother is unfortunately dead from an accident, and it turns out the feud was centered around a dog. You know what? Perfectly reasonable. Arriving back at the veteran, Arthur tells him the bad news, and he thanks him. He tells Arthur about a secret footlocker at the house, then passes away. Inside the footlocker next to him lies a special rifle, which seems like it could be placed on a mantle. So after returning to the other house, Arthur places the rifle on the mantle, which opens up a secret passage to an attic, where the footlocker lies. There's also a radio, and once Arthur picked up, some guys started talking about a private in need of rescue called Peachy. This is just Johnny Bolton. This does earn me my next achievement, Resistance is Futile, for talking to Johnny Bolton from the secret radio room. Arthur then heads over to this impatient looking person who tells him she's waiting on a meat delivery. Arthur actually knows the delivery guy, as he was a friend of Percy's when they were young, so Arthur goes and checks with the other people who were waiting, before one states he was last seen going through an alley where the Plowboys convene. Arthur knows where this is and finds Eddie beaten up on the ground. After dealing with the Plowboys by throwing a shock grenade which deals non-lethal damage, the remaining ones run away. Arthur decides to help Eddie get to the nearby pub, and also grabs the undelivered packages so he can deliver them himself. He takes Ed into his arms and begins to walk to the pub, safely delivering him there. Arthur then goes to deliver all the packages to the people waiting. Along the way, I get another skill, Wait for It, which allows Arthur to ready up a weapon, letting him do a powerful attack. After finishing the deliveries, Arthur heads to the butcher, who offers him an additional job, which Arthur accepts. I get another skill here, Block Party, which gives a 25% chance to knock down enemies when performing a perfect block. Arthur quickly grabs the mysterious package and delivers it to the butcher, who offers an apprenticeship, which Arthur accepts, before being knocked out. Arthur wakes up in the butcher's workshop, where the butcher asks Arthur to take the package and put it through various machines to purify the meat. Midway through, one of the machines breaks and Arthur fixes it with a spare part. After the meat is purified, he asks Arthur to use the shaping machine to create meat shapes based on the order they appear on the task board. After several orders are complete, the butcher gives Arthur a break, where Arthur learns of a way to break the machinery. He does just that, using the broken machine part from earlier to jam the whole shebang. This gets the butcher's notice and allows Arthur to escape through the cellar. During his escape, Arthur retrieves his stuff before climbing a ladder out. He then finds a bobby to alert them of what the butcher had been doing. Thankfully, they arrest the butcher and I get my next achievement, the Slaughterer's Apprentice. I also get the next skill here, Chain Sweep, which lets some weapons do additional damage to nearby targets. Arthur finally returns to the Okeron and says what he found out to the editor-in-chief. Basically, the Joy is going bad and Varlock is trying to find a permanent solution. So Elephant gives Arthur the Press Pass and Adulator, which can be worn on Arthur's head to automatically talk to people to reduce suspicion. With the Press Pass in hand, Arthur goes to Hayworth Labs. This time they let him in, and Arthur gets to see just how bad the state of the lab is. From explosions killing workers, corridors flooded with electrified water, and rooms filled with dangerous gas. Arthur finds the latest test formula for the permanent solution Verloc is working on, before opening some shutters and entering a reception-like area. Verloc easily catches on to the fact that Arthur isn't a worker, so sticks his beefy Bobby on Arthur. This Bobby is tankier than the others, and Arthur takes him down using the electric truncheon, which deals light damage and can stun enemies. After that fight, Arthur continues heading up to Verloc's office. Arthur flips 2 switches, which allows him access to Verloc's office, where he confronts him. He admits to everything about trying to make people permanently happy, before realizing Arthur was the downer people have been warned about. Arthur asks for the cod liver oil and threatens to smash the experimental batch if Verloc doesn't give it to him, so Verloc uses the held down button on his table to stun Arthur in place. But, like the idiot he is, couldn't get to the Bobby Popper to escape without releasing the button. Arthur pushes this very secret bright red button, which opens up a way to Verloc's storage, where he also keeps his secret experiments, including the original owner of Hayworth Labs and Gemma, who managed to escape. Thankfully, the cod liver oil was just on a counter, so Arthur can return to Sally now. Arthur escapes the lab by going through a conveyor belt, a vent, then draining this room to leave by a waste hatch. Returning to Sally's home, he gives her the oil and she has the letter on a desk. Arthur invites Sally to come with him, but Sally would need to wait, which Arthur couldn't do, so he bails, grabbing the letter and moving on. After this, I get the next achievement, the Great Lubricator. With the letter in hand, Arthur makes his way to the bridge and speaks to the Bobby, who says he's in luck as they were just about to close the bridge. Once he crosses, Arthur decides to get the shelter here, which he remembers being connected below the fashion shop. Before entering, I get the next skill, Worth the Wait, which makes charge attacks deal double damage with a 15% chance to stun enemies. Inside the store, Arthur overhears them needing a new bottle, and once the fashionista sees him, he gets the job. Arthur heads downstairs to help the other models to get some tips. He helps one by giving her whiskey, another by giving this guy a sewing kit for roach pants, and he helps the final model by giving them some flash. Arthur quickly gets his style on before strutting his stuff on the catwalk, like a boss. The fashionista was pleased with Arthur's performance, so gives him a key to the downstairs lounge where Arthur switches the final track access switch, getting me another achievement, Gimme Shelter, for opening all of Arthur's shelters. Ignore these ones. The game generates additional shelters for convenience, but they don't have a quest attached to them and aren't required for the achievement. Unfortunately, the parade district has gotten strict when it comes to the plague, so Arthur has to take a detour to get to the broadcast tower. He first had to open the shutters, then turn off the power, which let him leave. Unfortunately, he learns that the entire district is on lockdown, and he'd had to cancel the lockdown if he hoped to get to the tower. He did learn that he would need a Framistat from the Department of Scientific Research, so that's where Arthur goes next. I get the next skill here, Night Stalker, which makes Arthur harder to detect by 25% at nighttime. Once Arthur enters the department, he thinks the Framistat will be in the office above. He notices this control panel and a list of rules that would definitely come into play later. Trying to enter the office, Arthur notices it's locked, so he'd have to find another way in, which gives Arthur an idea. Arthur goes down and inspects some of the machines, noting the parts needed to fix each. Arthur then grabs needed valve handle, a spare nozzle, and a fancy battery before fixing out the machines. With all the machines up and running, Arthur heads up to the previous control panels and moves the machines, lining them up in such a way so the cannon would go off and break the glass. This plan works wonderfully, and a way into the office is forcefully opened. Arthur gets to the office by climbing up some debris where he takes down the lead scientist and grabs the Framistat from him. Arthur books it out of there, then begins to head to the Wellington Wells Health Institute. Another unfortunate thing happens as the way to the institute is blocked, so Arthur has to find yet another way in. He deactivates the headmistress by deactivating the modeling pump, which allows him to open the gate leading to the institute. After quickly rushing inside, he notes how careful he'll have to be. Arthur pulls this lever, which lets him get to the elevator where he goes onto the second floor. After some very sneaky stealthing, Arthur grabs the needed keycard from a desk before rushing back to the elevator. This time, he heads up to the executive floor, where he's ambushed by two doctors who inject him with coconut joy. They begin to experiment on Arthur, showing him several disturbing images to see how Arthur's brain would react, and well... The doctors weren't too thrilled with the results and decided to let Arthur go to his cell, but they couldn't figure out which button did it, and eventually everything explodes, allowing Arthur to make his way to the quarantine access and disable it, opening up all of the parade district. He gets out of the institute before finally heading to the broadcast tower. Once he enters, he heads down to the station, where everything is falling apart. After making several precarious trips, he finds himself in some modeling pipe tunnels, where he comes across the corpse of Prudence, his coworker who tried to escape. Arthur found himself at the modeling mines, and would have to find a way to get back onto the tracks to escape. Arthur heads down this elevator, which lets him speak to this guy who gives him a keycard to activate an excavator. So, after traversing further into the mines, Arthur finds said excavator and activates it, letting it slowly rise up before he begins to bum rush out of the mines. He finally makes it back onto the tracks, and soon he's on the outside, just a hop, skip, and jump away from finally leaving Wellington Wells. When he finally leaves, he meets with the same chief inspector from earlier, the one that mistook him for Percy, where it's revealed the actual truth of the past. Arthur didn't just lie about his birthday, he used Percy's ID and pretended to be him just to get off the train, leaving his brother behind. He panics, finally remembering the past, and heavily regrets what he did. The chief talks to him and gives Arthur the motivation he needs to keep going, so Arthur takes off his happy face, putting Wellington Wells behind him and heading forward into the unknown. With that, I get the next achievement, the Arthur Hastings, for completing Arthur's story. Sally's story begins with her in her home, making up a batch of Blackberry Joy. Suddenly, her doorbell rings, so she goes to answer it. Once I get control, I check out her stats and notice she has differences in her skill tree. All of her super duper perks are different, as long as Arthur's combat tree being replaced by a survival one. She also plays differently from Arthur. Being petite, she carries body slower and can't use heavy weapons at all. She can't use workbenches to make gadgets or clothing, but she is chemically brilliant, allowing her to make chemicals no one else can. When Sally answers the door, she sees a very impatient Spud waiting for her Blackberry Joy. In fact, he's so impatient, he busts down the door and begins to make a complete mess of her lab. Once he runs upstairs, Sally grabs an emergency kit, which has a knockout syringe. Sally can't use normal stealth takedowns like Arthur, instead she needs to use craftable knockout syringes to do the takedown. Unfortunately, these can't be bought from shops and are extremely rarely found around the map. Sally follows Spud up into a room where it's revealed that Sally has a baby. For context, nobody in the entirety of Wellington Wells has had a baby in several years, as Joy is a contraceptive and children remind them of the Authority Project. To say the least, Spud thought he was crazy and wasn't actually seeing a baby, so Sally quickly neutralizes him and dumps his unconscious self in the alley. After that, Sally goes to turn down the heat of her machines, then goes up to comfort Gwen. This shows a special mechanic with Sally, as anytime she comforts her child, she'll get a temporary stamina and fatigue boost. Sally heads downstairs to answer the door, where a Bobby lets her know about her bashed-in door before going on about his day. Sally then heads into her kitchen and makes some filtered water, which she uses to change Gwen's diaper. Another person is at Sally's door, so she answers it, and it's just another person wanting Blackberry Joy, but at least this one leaves when Sally tells him it's still being made. Sally realizes that Gwen is probably hungry, so heads up to the fridge to get some milk, only to see that Spud had ruined it all. She calms Gwen down before thinking that Lionel, a local shopkeep, might have some tinned milk. I get the next achievement, Breaking Blackberry, for completing Sally's intro. The game also warns me here about the fact that Gwen will need to be checked on occasionally, and if she isn't, Sally will suffer negative debuffs. Sally checks in with Lionel, and he does have tinned milk, but it's pricey, so they make a deal. Sally will go to the garden district to get some records made by Uncle Jack, and in exchange she'll get the milk. Sally quickly heads back home and gets her garden district kit, which gives her a tattered dress and a just-in-case weapon. Before leaving for the garden district, I grab Trackstar, which makes Sally run 10% faster while consuming 25% less stamina, and Hardy, which makes the buffs from being fed, hydrated, and rested last 50% longer. Sally reaches the bridge to Luz's home, and thankfully it's not down due to any silly reason, so she freely passes into the district. While on the bridge, Sally brings out an atomizer. Sally is able to craft special chemicals that she can fill atomizers up with to induce different effects on enemies. Entering Luz's home, she easily finds the fan club and lies to them and says that Uncle Jack is coming, to get them distracted so she could steal the records for herself. Soon she returns to the bridge where she gets checked for plague and passes with flying colors, allowing her to return to the village. I grab the next skill here, and quite honestly the best skill in the entire game, Picky Picky, which lets every harvestable get twice as much. Returning to Lionel, Sally gives him the records and she gets the milk, but she also asks Lionel to make her a plant feeder, but in actuality it's an automatic baby feeder, which would mean less trips to feed Gwen. It will take a few days to build, so Sally continues about her adventures. Upon exiting, she finds a sign that points to a seamstress shop, but ignores it for now to go feed Gwen. Suddenly her doorbell rang, and it was a Bobby questioning her about the Blackberry Joy, even taking her to the station to basically just tell them that everything she's been doing is for the Blackberry Joy, and she even states she was visiting the general, which straightens them up a bit. They urge her to hurry up and making it, as they're getting restless for it, and even threaten to force her to work with Verloc, her ex, so she hurries back home to finish this batch. Unfortunately, they occupied a little too much of her time, and her lab was set ablaze, ruining her batch and her equipment. Thankfully, she could replace the equipment, but it would take some items from her old chemistry set back in her old home in the Garden District. Before heading over, I grab the next skill, Hauler, which gives Sally 50 extra pounds of carry weight. Once she returns to Lud's home, she arrives to her childhood home, where she gets a vision from her past when the chief inspector took her back to her home, where her mother had poisoned and killed her entire family to prevent them from going onto the train, leaving Sally all alone. At the top of the house lies Sally's old chemistry kit, and with this, she heads back to her home. Once there, she repairs her lab with the kit, then sets out to replenish her ingredients. Before heading out, I grab the next skill, Craftsman, which lets crafted weapons and atomizers last twice as long. Sally then goes to the pub, well actually the room above it, as here lies the only way Sally can get different clothes. After completing a quick quest where Sally retrieves an invitation to the Reform Club, the shop opens, and there's some interesting wares here, but Sally can't afford any, so she goes back to replenishing her ingredients. She begins to head to Stuart, someone she knows who could supply her with the chemicals she needs. Arriving at the shop, Stuart wasn't in, and his wife was working the counter, and she doesn't like Sally. So Sally needed to find another way to get her chemicals. Thankfully, she does know someone else who could help her get the chemicals she needs, Harry Cavendish, someone who worked at Hayworth Labs. Sally stops by his house, where Sally learned he got fired for something he didn't even do. However, Sally could probably find evidence that he was framed in the bag of the doctor who framed him, and with a note on how to extract from the ingredients she needs. Arriving at his house, Sally sneaks past some doctors before sealing the bag, which she realizes could probably be turned into a carrying cot for Gwen. Sally returns to Harry and gives him the notes, and she gets the code to access Rat Hole, an area where they pump toxic waste from the labs. Before heading to a hatch to travel there, I grab some more skills, Tireless and Smooth Talker. Sally heads to Lionel and asks him to make the carry cot, which he says will take a day or two to make, so Sally sets her focus back on Rat Hole. By using any hatch, she travels to Rat Hole, where I get my next achievement, Archipelagist, for reaching every island in the game. Sally begins to head to the lab in Rat Hole, where she needs to find a keycard to access the pipe she needs. The keycard is easily found downstairs, so she heads back up and grabs several canteens of the stuff. When she was at a chemistry station, she crafted the Mercury Amalgam. I grabbed a few skills here, Tippy Toe, OU, and Haggler. Haggler gives better prices at vendors. Now she needed pituitary extract, so she headed back to Stuart to get her extractor back as he was tinkering with her pituitary extractor. Thankfully he was there, and she easily gets her extractor. She couldn't think of anyone to use the extractor on to get what she wanted, so she heads back home to use her blower to send a message to Mikey. She then heard that someone was upstairs, so she went to investigate, but it was only General Bing, where Gwen decided to be the best time to begin crying, so Sally tries her best to cover her daughter's sounds. Soon she slept and woke up and the general was gone. She could only hope he didn't notice Gwen. Thankfully, Mikey answered and told her to meet him in the usual meeting place, which was at a nearby alley. Once arriving, they exchange notes and Sally sees Arthur again. All the stories of the characters are happening at the same time, and this is the point where Arthur arrives at Maidenholm to get the letter of transit. Of course, their reunion goes the same way, with this starting off well, but quickly turning sour as Arthur brings up the unsavory past. But as both characters are unreliable narrators, Arthur straight up leaves the alley instead of stopping and turning like he did in his story. Once Arthur left, Sally got the patient she needed from Mikey, Colonel Lawrence, so she headed over to his house. Once arriving, she convinces his family that she is here to give Lawrence a suppository and heads up to see him. She sneaks up on him and uses the extractor, getting the specific pituitary extract she needs for her Blackberry Joy. Before leaving, I quickly grab the next skill, Lucky Me, which makes rare loot more common. As she thinks on how to get the next two ingredients, she has a memory of the Weird Sisters, a trio of women who live in the Garden District who know about Sally's pregnancy, as they predicted it. Seeming as they like to use herbs to make potions, she assumes that they'll know how to get what she needs, so begins to head towards them. Sally soon arrives at the hill and climbs up to speak to them. The witches give Sally a potion that'll help Gwen sleep and also get hungry less, meaning less trips to take care of her. Before the witches help her with getting the ingredients she needs, they first want her to have a better belief in magic, so they task her with delivering some bricks to a chest they've placed in the wild. I grab a new skill here, Blender, which allows Sally to hide at benches like Arthur could, while also letting her sleep in own beds and having an easier time breaking line of sight when escaping enemies. I also grab Sweet Dreams. Once arriving at the chest, a group of head boys were trying to unlock its secrets. I continuously reset here as I kept accidentally killing the head boys. If you're wondering why, of course the answer is related to achievements. There's an achievement for completing a playthrough without killing a single enemy. Now, I'm gonna say this now as I didn't know it at the time, but the achievement is either bugged or mislabeled, as you only need to complete one act without killing anyone to get the achievement, but you also need to finish the game as well. As I didn't know this at the time, I actually decided to check on Arthur's stats to see if he killed anyone, as even though I played like a pacifist, I wasn't entirely certain if I also accidentally killed someone in his story, and lo and behold, he has a whopping 1 kill. I have absolutely zero idea who Arthur killed, as even looking back through the recordings, I couldn't find an instance of him killing an enemy, but since he had 1 kill and I was still under the impression he needed to beat the whole game without killing anyone, I just decided to take it easy and kill enemies if need be. Once the head boys were down, Sally places the bricks in the chest before reciting the prayer the sisters gave her, which magically did make her stronger, allowing her to carry more. So Sally reports back to the witches, who tell her to clear out the mystical stone circle nearby. I quickly grab another skill, Frenzy, which lets Sally deal 100% more damage when below 15% health. Once Sally arrives at the stones, she finds a group of people who were brewing poison for their cult. So she decides to steal the poison, then goes back to the witches. She tells the witches the situation, and one of them remarks about how her mother did something similar, so they decide to give her the recipe for Digilax and its antidote, which she will make and use on the cult's poison to save them. I grab the next skill here, Alchemist, which unlocks several powerful chemicals for Sally to craft. In order to craft the Digilax and its antidote, Sally heads over to Stuart's shop to buy some bleach, then grabs some honey from a bee nest, and finally crafts the antidote. Sally then sneaks through the house of the space god cult and detoxifies the brew, making the people of the cult realize they don't actually want to follow this cult and leave. With the cult taken care of, Sally heads back to the witches to report her success, and they give her a butterfly net and the remaining recipes she needs to finish her Blackberry Joy, pheromones, which she can make with the butterflies that she can now get with the net the sisters gave her. I also get the next achievement after completing this quest, the Weird Sisters. Sally figures that she could get some of the butterflies she needs from the train station where Ollie lives, so begins to head there, but not before I grab the next skill, Double Double, which makes crafted chemicals yield twice as much. Arriving at the station, the building looks far worse for wear than when we last saw it with Arthur, and Sally hopes that the butterflies survived. Thankfully they did, and with her net she begins to collect a whole bunch of them. In order to get out, she needed to grab a key from this guy, which angered all the plagued wastrels. After luring them away, she grabs the key and collects more butterflies before leaving, now with all the ingredients she'd need for her Blackberry Joy. Once she gets home, she crafts the needed pheromones. I also get the next skill here, Herbalist. By using each of the machines and turning up the heat, eventually some Blackberry Joy is synthesized, and as if the constabulary knew, there was a Bobby ringing her doorbell. This one tells Sally that they're still growing restless, but Sally tells him to relax as she just finished the next batch, so he brings her to the station where the Bobbies put on a spectacular one-song musical for Sally. After that magical experience, I get the next skill, Hustler, which gives even better shopping prices. Sally begins to have the strangest feeling about Gwen, so goes back to check on her, and unfortunately she wasn't feeling well. Sally consults her medical book, and Gwen has measles, which could be treated by cod liver oil. Sally remembers that Verloc would probably have some, so decides to make a visit to his labs. Before going, Sally decides to spoil Gwen a bit by buying the baby feeder she asked Lionel to make and quickly installs it. As the name suggests, this would automatically feed Gwen, so Sally would have to take less trips to her so she could better focus on getting themselves out of Wellington Wells. With the feeder set up, I grab another skill, Night Stalker. Sally heads to the factory, where she's easily able to get in due to her past history with Verloc, though it seems he hasn't quite gotten over Sally, so he kicks her out before she even has the chance to ask about the cod liver oil. I get the next achievement here, the Toxic X, for speaking with Verloc at the Joy Factory. Now Sally needed to find another way to get the oil, and she decided Arthur would be the best way to do so. On the way to Arthur, I get the next achievement, gotta catch them all, for catching 40 butterflies with the net. After the train station, butterflies begin to spawn around flowers in the map, as they and their pheromones can make useful chemicals. Sally finds Arthur in the Garden District, another example of the unreliable narrator between the two as they previously met in Sally's home. The exchange goes relatively the same, aside from the different locations. Arthur asks for a letter of transit, and Sally says she'll get one if Arthur can get a bottle of the oil. They kiss, then a flustered Arthur quickly leaves the scene to get the oil, which meant Sally now had to get the letter. So Sally needed to speak with General Bing to get the letter, which meant paying a visit to the memorial camp. They open the door for her, and soon she finds her way to the general's office, who simply gives her the letter, but also reveals that he knows about her child. He states he could get Gwen out, but Sally would have to stay in a safe house that he's been making for a while. Sally gives a hard, firm no before leaving. When she left, she recalls that Bing has a boat that he's been working on. If Sally could fix it up, then she could use it to get out of Wellington Wells with Gwen, so that's where she begins to head, to the camp's boathouse. Arriving at the boathouse, she speaks to this joiner who is tasked with fixing the boat. Sally learns here that Bing has the only key for it and that the motor was rusted beyond repair. Therefore, she decides to speak with Dr. Faraday about making a new motor. She also figures to activate the track access in the old air raid shelter for the camp for ease of access. Before even speaking to Faraday, she realizes she'll need to know how to drive a boat and remembers about a crazy pirate who's always at the pub, thus heads there. Along the way, she buys the carry cot Lionel made for her before reaching the pub. At the bar, I buy a new skill, nothing to see here, which makes the curfew not apply to Sally and makes people react slower when she's trespassing. The barmaid said that the pirate was looking for Eddie, and he was last seen going to Wednesday Hill, giving Sally some direction. Arriving at the hill, the pirate explains the situation to Sally. The Yam Cult took Eddie and were going to kill him. Sally beats them down until they run away and saves Eddie, who thanks her profusely, and the pirate gives her a book about the boat she needs to fix up. Already being in the Garden District, Sally decides to check up with Arthur in the same spot they previously met. Sally gets the oil, Arthur gets his letter, but in this version, Sally tells Arthur she has a baby, before he leaves alone to continue his adventure, leaving Sally to continue with her boat escape plan. Sally heads back to Gwen and uses the oil to cure her of her measles. With Gwen cured, Sally makes her way to Faraday for a boat motor. Along the way, I grab two skills, Body Snatcher and Sneak Thief. Arriving at Faraday's home, Sally notices it's completely shuttered up and calls out to Roger and James who open up the house for her, but James tries to lie about Faraday being dead before Roger tells Sally that she's just upstairs. Going up there, Sally asks Faraday if she could make her a boat motor, which they make a deal. Sally will get a record from Nick Lightbearer for Faraday, and Faraday will make the motor. Sally thinks that the record she'll need will be at Nick's house. Before going there, I sell a bunch of flowers to Lionel, which gets me my next achievement, Baby, You're a Rich Man, for earning 10,000 sovereigns from looting or bartering. Sally remembered that Nick gave her a keycard to his house, but it was left in the trunk of a car. Arriving at the impound, Sally soon finds the car and with it the card, and soon reaches Nick's house. She takes the backdoor entrance and finds Nick in the bathtub after Arthur's encounter, though this time he seems less dead, so I'm not actually certain if he's dead or not. Sally heads to his changing room and finds a button behind the mirror. After solving a quick positioning puzzle, the button works and opens a secret elevator, which Sally takes down to Nick's pad. However, to get to the pad, Sally has to do some super awesome spy stuff first. When she's inside, she grabs the song and heads back to Faraday. Sally gives her the record, and Faraday actually upheld her end of the bargain with no tricks and gave Sally the boat motor. Sally just needed the key to the boat now, and believes the key to be in the safe house being mentioned earlier. Sally knows the location of the safe house as it's where she held a masquerade party for the general a while back. She finds a vent that lets her infiltrate the building, and after some more sick spy action, she finds the desk, but it was trapped with an alarm that gets the general's attention. He tranquilized her and brought her into the safe house proper, revealing the provisions he has for her, but even as Sally pleads for him to let Gwen stay, he disagrees, leaving Sally no choice but to hit him on the head, buying her enough time to begin her escape. Unfortunately, he has the only keycard out. Sally goes into, well, a different safe room, where Sally picks up some chemicals to craft morpholine, which she could use on the fountain to take him down. Braving the general's wrath, she steps out and notices the fountain needs to be powered, meaning she had to refill a few batteries before she could pull off her plan. There was a modeling charger nearby, so by utilizing this, she fully charges the fountain and pours the morphine into the water. This knocks him out, and Sally grabs both the boat key and the key card. She retrieves her stuff, and I buy an unnecessary amount of skills here. Iron Stomach, which lets her eat rotten food, no downside, Ear to the Ground, which lets her notice footsteps from farther away while crouching, and Tech Friendly, which makes machines take twice as long to see Sally. As Sally goes to leave, Bean tries to stop her once more, but Sally has had enough of him and slashes his eye with a shard of glass before leaving him in the safe house. Heading back to her home, she sees the doctor trying to make his way up towards Gwen, so quickly shuts that down. Once it was night, Sally had everything she needed to leave, a carry cot to carry Gwen, and a boat to escape. However, I decided to quickly finish up a Sally-centric achievement. The atomizers can be filled with various chemicals, but the most helpful one is Sleep Tight, which is crafted from ingredients obtained from the alchemist perk, and using this on enemies just straight up knocks them out. After doing this 50 times, I get the next achievement. I love the smell of chloroform in the morning. After waiting for the night again, Sally puts Gwen in the bag and travels to the hatch in the air raid shelter, where she was just a little ways away from the boat. After reaching it, surprisingly without any issue, she starts the boat before sailing away, getting out of Wellington Wells for good. Gwen begins to cry and Sally goes to sush her, but what's the point? They're free. Sally takes off her happy mask and remarks about how her and Gwen would now be the two musketeers, before sailing off to better horizons. I then get the achievement, the Sally Boyle, for completing Sally's playthrough. Ollie's story begins right after he used Arthur to raid the military camp and he was going through his loot. He begins to talk to someone named Margaret, his daughter, who will be accompanying him for the rest of the journey. Eventually, Arthur bursts in, talking about how the tanks were paper mache, and he begins to realize that they could have fought back, but Margaret was confused as to how Ollie didn't know as he was the general secretary. Eventually, Margaret convinces Ollie to give Arthur the doohickey and Arthur goes on his way. Ollie figures that he couldn't have known about the tanks, as if he did, he surely would have said something. He decides to visit the general in the camp, but before he's able to, some head boys start using some bombs to blow up the train station, hence why it's destroyed in Sally's story. This is where the first look into Ollie's playstyle comes in, and he's basically a tank, being able to hit enemies with extra damage while taking less, but at the cost he's not really fast or good at the whole being discreet thing, though he can automatically do sneak takedowns on every enemy. Ollie is also mechanically brilliant, but can't use the chemistry station to save his life. Ollie heads down a lift and beats up some enemies. Once they're dealt with, he disables the bomb and goes to check for more. He finds more and heads down to disable them, easily doing so, but he needs a way out. He figures he should head to the roof and jump, as he has a parachute that should let him fall down safely. However, before he could get the parachute, part of the roof fell on him and knocked him out. Since he's a tank, he gets off a little worse for wear and finds the parachute. He takes some lifts up to the roof before jumping down as the station explodes. He lands somewhat safe, and I get the next achievement, Bon Voyage, for completing Ollie's intro. That one intro quest gave 18 whole skill points, so I spinned a bit. Ollie has Sally's survival skill tree and Arthur's combat skill tree, and of course his own unique super duper skill tree. I buy Trackstar, Picky, Hardy, Buff, and Holler. Ollie then decides to free one of the soldiers the head boys captured to get help entering the camp. However, the game introduces Ollie's unique mechanic, blood sugar. Ollie will have to craft and use glucose syringes to get his blood sugar to a reasonable level. If it's too high or too low, he'll have debuffs. To craft the syringes, he'll need empty syringes and honey. Before heading to the house, I grab the craftsman skill. Ollie arrives at the house and after beating up some head boys finds the captive. The soldier gives him a way past the gates via blackmail, thus Ollie heads to the camp. On the way, I grab the tireless skill. Ollie reaches the gate and uses the blackmail to open the gate, though he needed a way into the actual camp. I also grab the skills buffier and wait for it here. Margaret suggests getting into the camp via the air raid shelter, so that's what Ollie does. The way into the shelter was blocked though. Fortunately, the camp was blowing up the distillery inside it, meaning Ollie could use the explosives to open the shelter. At the distillery, there were no bombs in sight, so the guy who was delivering the explosives hadn't come yet. There was a commotion nearby, and after dealing with it, Ollie got the explosives off this guy. As I head back, I grab the skills Buffiest and Iron Fist. Pulling away into the shelter, Ollie heads into the camp and makes way to General Bing's office. Along the way, Ollie comes across a cook, who offers to smuggle him out, which Ollie decides to take him up on this offer later. The door to the office was locked, and the key was on this guy by the bathroom. Once Ollie was in the office, he talks with Bing, who reveals that not only did Ollie know about the tanks, but they also had this conversation before. Bing does accidentally give Ollie the idea to talk with the executive committee before kicking him out and sounding the alarm. Getting out of the camp wasn't hard, Ollie just hides in the cook's wagon and gets off at the bridge. Ollie decides his best course of action would be getting Miss Bing to talk to the executive committee, as people listen to her. The Bobby to open the gate towards her estate wouldn't open it unless Ollie went to solve the murder of some other Bobbies. Before going to the crime scene, I spend my accumulating skill points on tank and pack a wallop. Arriving at the scene, Ollie finds a depleted gas bomb, a sabotage gas mask, and a cryptic note written by the murderer. So the Bobbies died to a gas bomb because of their sabotage gas mask, and the person who did it was most likely Foggy Jack, a serial killer. With all the evidence collected, I grab the next skills, Block Party and Hurler, a skill that grants 25% extra distance to thrown items and makes them deal 20% more damage. Back at the bridge, the Bobby lets Ollie pass. He stands on this platform and is evaluated to see if he can pass, which he is properly dressed after he makes himself a padded suit, and he walks into the village. Taking joy with Ollie has more consequences, as it makes him throw up, easily making people aggressive towards him. Before heading forward, I buy the Iron Stomach skill. Arriving at Victoria's estate, Ollie takes the front door and Victoria greets him. Ollie talks to her about telling the townspeople that there's a food shortage and they need to go off their joy, which Victoria doesn't like. As she goes to alert the Bobbies, Ollie knocks her unconscious, tying her to a chair to interrogate her. Victoria pleads to Ollie for him to get her joy, even saying that she'll take him to the executive committee if he does so. Ollie bluffs, saying that he'll get her joy, and finds it in her bathroom. Returning to her, Ollie crushes the pills so she can't take them. She wasn't happy about this, but her blower gets a message to which Ollie responds to it. After sending it, someone knocks at the door, which Ollie turns them away by posing as the general. This somehow works, and once it was safe, Ollie offers Victoria an apple. When she rejects, he decides to make her some coffee yogurt by raiding ingredients from her pantry. Victoria eats the yogurt, but then there was another knock at the door. This time, Ollie poses as her maid, but seeming as the guy behind the door needed to speak with someone, Ollie drags Bing away and wears a bathing suit he found upstairs. Ollie opens the door and the gardener tells him something that really could have been sent over the blower, but once the door is closed again, he drags Bing back out, to which there was another message in the blower. Wow, Victoria sure is busy. After answering it and sending it, some Bobbies show up waiting for their lunch. Ollie gives them a plankboard sandwich with nails on the side before returning to Victoria. She finally concedes, giving Ollie away to the committee and tells him it's not going to work unless the joy is destroyed. Ollie frees her and she immediately turns on him, running away to go get her joy. Once he wakes back up to consciousness, Ollie needs to escape. Thankfully, he already has the letter of transit, which he found in a secret safe, so he booked it out of there. Once he's out, I get the next achievement. Miss Bing is indisposed. Ollie begins to head to the parade to access the executive committee. At the bridge, the Bobbie tells them they aren't accepting visitors due to the plague within the parade. Margaret suggests to Ollie about taking the modeling tunnels to the parade, so Ollie was off to Dr. Faraday. On the way, I grabbed several skills. Sluggish, which grants 10% chance for enemies to be knocked unconscious after a takedown, and Proper Care, which makes weapons degrade 25% slower. Arriving at Faraday's house, he goes up to speak with her, but in her stead is Roger and James. They were stuck in her lab but agreed to look for the modeling tunnel blueprints if Ollie waters the plants. After turning this foul to do just that, he returns to Roger and James, who says he'll need to pollinate the flowers before they can give him the blueprints. They give him a bee cannon, so Ollie travels to one of the many bee nests around the map to gather them. On the way back, I get the next achievement, Sugar Daddy, for using 10 glucose syringes. Once returning to Faraday's home, Ollie uses the cannon to disperse some bees, pollinating the flowers. Returning to James and Roger, they found the blueprints. The only unfortunate thing is that the tunnel entrance is under the Uncle Jack fan club, who don't like Ollie as he has a hatred towards Uncle Jack for a variety of reasons, mainly being he was the voice of the German Occupational Authority. Roger and James also suggest a way out via a parade float stashed in the top of the fan club, but without helium it wouldn't work. Margaret suggests grabbing extra helium from the Department of Science in the parade district. So Ollie was off to the fan club. Before arriving, I buy another skill, Warrior, which gives a plethora of bonuses. Ollie is able to attack 5% faster, and attacking and blocking costs 10% less stamina. His movement penalty while blocking is reduced by 25%, and NPCs have a 10% chance to flee when at low health. At the club, Ollie searches around for the addict, and once he finds it, grabs the parade float. Back downstairs, Ollie grabs the fire extinguisher to extinguish the fireplace, which had a passage to the tunnels. Once he goes through it, he was at the parade, and I get the next achievement, get the float out of here. Now that he was at the parade, his goal was getting to the Department of Science for helium for the balloon. Ollie also gets to see the havoc Arthur left behind when he ended the quarantine, making the streets riddled with plagued individuals. Upon arriving at the department, I get the next skill, Chain Sweep. Ollie finds the hydrogen tank and just picks up the whole thing, I guess. This brought in security, and Ollie decides it's the best decision to travel up to the main office via the cannon. He pumps it up several times before climbing in and launching off. Here, this guy opens the doors and Ollie heads to the broadcast tower to confront the executive committee. Before going, I grab the last few skills, Bloody Hell, which doubles the chance to inflict bleeding with certain weapon types, and Blockbuster, which gives a 25% chance to break enemy weapons when blocking, and a 10% chance to stun them if you block their heavy attacks. Arriving at the tower, Ollie heads up, but needs to figure out a way past the headmistress if he wants to go any further. By climbing these bits of extruded wall, Ollie finds some control panels, which he short-circuits, turning off the headmistress. After turning the power onto the elevator, Ollie heads up to the executive committee, who already know about the food shortage but don't have a single solution. They just keep taking their joy in forgetting. So Margaret suggests the unthinkable, heading up to Uncle Jack's recording booth and having him tell all of Wellington Wells. Once arriving, it's scarily empty, and Ollie finds a tape labeled Jack's last tape. Plugging it in plays a joy-shattering sequence. Margaret was never Ollie's daughter. Jack never tipped off the Germans of where Margaret was hiding. Margaret is Jack's daughter, and it was Ollie who tipped the Germans about Margaret's whereabouts, which got her killed. Ollie couldn't live with the guilt and took an oblivion from Sally Boyle, which made him forget but also made him start hallucinating Margaret everywhere. Jack, in this tape, told everyone to get off their joy, as they were running out of food, so Margaret tells Ollie they need to broadcast the tape. Once he plugs it in, the committee cuts the power, and he needs to continuously turn this backup power wheel to get it up and running so he can broadcast. While this happens, several bobbies come through the poppers and Ollie has to fend against them. After several cycles of this, the tape gets fully broadcasted, and I get the next achievement, a heavy burden. Ollie heads to the roof and blows the parade float up to travel out. Margaret has a final heart-to-heart with Ollie, telling him to let her go, and since she's always right, Ollie lets go, taking the float out of Wellington Wells for good. Suddenly the story shifts back to Arthur, and the chief inspector gives him a pep talk about being strong, being able to let go of the past, and to make decisions that surprise even yourself. He then offers Arthur oblivion, but Arthur declines, deciding to live a life knowing who he is rather than being blissfully happy all the time. Eventually, it's a bit into the future, and Arthur states what a lovely day it is, like he always had, but this kid states it clearly isn't, which Arthur agrees to happily. Thus ends the main story of We Happy Few, getting me another achievement, the Ollie Starkey, for completing his playthrough. Now, there are a few achievements I missed, so I need to... Well, that was unexpected, but let's push past that depressing tape of a clearly fake me. Let's do something fun. Yes, something fun. How about a nice game of Simon Says? Now, you all know the rules, don't you? I'm going to give you a task, but if I don't say Simon Says, you don't do it. And if I do say Simon Says, you do it. Okay, ready? Simon Says, begin. Simon says, jump up and down like you're celebrating someone's birthday. And if it is your birthday, well, happy birthday to you. And if anyone near you is celebrating their birthday, you have to wish them a happy one. Ah, I got you. I didn't say Simon Says. No, I'm joking. That one doesn't count. Simon says, clap. Simon says, touch your toes. Raise your hands. I got you. You're out. And you as well. Simon says the game is over. That was quite fun, wasn't it? Now, let's get back to the broadcast, shall we? I loaded back before finishing Ollie's playthrough, as there were a few Ollie-centric achievements I needed to take care of. As I go about searching for missed areas and such, I get another achievement, a bit of the old ultraviolence for killing 100 enemies in a playthrough. Going for another achievement, I throw a lightning rod repeatedly, eventually getting the achievement Lighten Up for using 25 lightning rods as Ollie. The next achievement I decided was for collecting all the notes relating to Prudence. After checking each save file, I was only missing one note found in the starting area in Arthur's playthrough found in the Wastrel town. A bunch of the other notes are found in significant areas of the game, including shelters. Once I grab the final note, instructions from Mr. Kite, I get the achievement, Hot on Her Heels. The next achievement took a while to get. As you go through your adventures in Wellington Wells, the TVs and radios will play a selection of Uncle Jack episodes. If you watch the TVs or radios while it's playing an episode, you'll get the episode to watch on the main menu. There's 45 of these episodes in total, with each one belonging to a certain genre for showing, such as the Wakey Wakey episodes and Nighty Night episodes. The genres play at specific times of the day, so Wakey Wakey plays at 7 AM every day and Nighty Night plays at 10:30 PM every day. The other times that are playing as episodes are 12 PM for News Hour, 4 PM for I Hear You, Humor Hour, Play with Jack, and Funny Old Customs, and 7:30 PM for Well, That Tastes Amazing, and Famous Britons. My favorite area for doing this was the hatch in St. George's home, as there's a bed like 5 feet away from radio. Sleeping for 24 hours will switch you to a random episode that fits the time frame. After endlessly sleeping and listening to the radio, I was interrupted by an achievement, Don't You Have Somewhere Else to Be, for surviving 50 days. After days and days and days and days of waiting, I eventually needed a change of scenery, so switched to Ollie and rather quickly managed to get the final episode that I was missing, getting me another achievement. You do know Jack. The phone booths from before make a return. By leaving an area and waiting 24 in-game hours, then returning to the Garden District, the booths will have the phone ringing, and after answering them until the conversation is complete, I get the next achievement, Our Prudent Friend. The next achievement was rather simple to get. By taking enough joy, Arthur went into a state of pure joy, and after inciting violence and dying, I get the next achievement. Now I can die happy, for dying while on too much joy. The final achievement I wanted to get before going into another playthrough was simple but weird. Catching the plague in this game seems like it would be easy, but it's actually pretty difficult. The easiest way to do it is by killing a plague-infected race troll, bringing their body to a safe house, sleeping for 24 hours, then searching their corpse. Once you're infected, jab yourself a Symphenosilklin to cure the plague. This grants me another achievement. I got better. starting a new playthrough as Arthur, he decides that everything that could come after isn't worthwhile, and takes joy into the game. Alright, pack it up folks, let's go to the DLC! This earns me another achievement, Snug as a Bug on a Drug. Starting the actual playthrough proper, I make Arthur use his restoration machine to approve the first document, censor the second, and then approve the last. This gets me my next achievement, Employee of the Month, for only redacting the uncomfortable newspapers. Heading into Clive's office, Arthur uses his restoration machine to approve the first document and censor the rest, sabotaging Clive's work and getting another achievement. Enjoy the view. For this playthrough, my main goal is to get the Sane achievement, which as I said earlier, can be obtained by killing no one in a single act. Since I was able to beat Arthur's playthrough before with only killing one person, not much changes with how I play, but there are still a few achievements that I can get as Arthur, so I'll talk about those as they come along. The first interesting thing of note is Johnny Bolton's quest. After getting him the doll, he asks Arthur to bring him a first aid kit, which if you haven't used any, there's plenty before this point. Once Bolton has his first aid kit, he asks Arthur to sneak into the mystery house and steal some inferior linen, so that he can make a suit of blending. In order to get inside the house, Arthur has to cleanse the doors of his perception, which lets him inside. After some very careful sneaking and several takedowns, Arthur takes down the cultist priest, which gets me another achievement, the importance of not being seen, for completing the mystery house without being seen once. I grab the linens and return to Bolton, who gives Arthur a recipe to craft a suit of blending, which makes Arthur harder to see. Next, Arthur finds Lionel, who asks him to find 3 golden records in the Garden District. They're just scattered about in 3 marked houses in the district, so after Arthur has all of them, he returns to Lionel, who gives him another proposition. There's a marble cat statue in St. George's home that a client of his wants back, so he gives Arthur the address and asks him to go get it. While activating the track switch in St. George's home, Arthur takes a flash, which makes him faster. This gets me an additional achievement, Arthur Hastings. Arthur gets into the house Lionel told him about and finds the cat. No, that one's fake. Okay, this is the real deal. No, still fake. Aw, here we are. Really? Fake again? Alright, finally Arthur finds the real one, but stays and explores the house, finding all the fake ones, which gets me another achievement, Cat Burglar. Eventually, Arthur finds himself at the Joy Factory, and in a different timeline, he finds a man named Ryan Andrews and kills him, getting me another achievement, Shocking Biology. Returning to the proper timeline, Arthur goes through the entire factory without killing anyone and continues his adventure. Nothing much interesting happens until Arthur leaves Wellington Wells, as on the bridge he finds the final memory mask in the entire game. There's a whopping 44 of these, 20 masks for Arthur and 12 masks for both Sally and Ollie. A bunch of these masks are easily found in significant areas in the game, including big side quests. However, the ones I want to talk about are the missable ones, which only Arthur seems to have. The first missable one is in the military camp during Band of Brothers. The second is found in the car wash room during the Great Stink. The third can be found during Hayworth Labs after meeting with Verloc. The fourth is found during Britannia in the room where you power the excavator. And the final one is still during Britannia, found on the bridge before the end of Arthur's playthrough. Collecting that one got me the related achievement, Remember. After going through the door and meeting the Chief Inspector, I get the next achievement, the Saint, for completing a singular act without killing a single enemy. Now it's time for I Hear You, the part of the show where I, Jack Worthing, answers your questions about our life in Wellington Wells. Today's segment will be shorter than usual, so I will only have time to read one letter. Today's letter comes from Theodore Hayes of St. James Parade. Dear Uncle Jack, you seem quite different as of late. Have you been replaced? Well, we here at the Broadcast Tower have gotten your numerous questions and concerns regarding this rumor that I've been replaced. I can assure you, I am the same dear old Uncle Jack that's been with you since the beginning. If you are seeing me as some beastly creature or think I sound different, consult your local doctor. You can never take enough joy. Sometimes there is a limit, and these hallucinations can be caused by taking too much joy. We Happy Few has 3 story-heavy DLCs that each expand upon the world of Wellington Wells. Each DLC has 10 achievements related to them, making up for the rest of the 30 achievements to get 100%. The first DLC follows the story of Roger and James 2 years before the events of We Happy Few, where the player takes control of Roger. Roger's story begins not at the start, but at the middle, where he's defending some townspeople from the invading robots, with him using a ray gun to take them down. However, he jumps back to a few hours before to tell the story properly from the beginning. James had asked him to get a few things from town, and he also had to pick up a Bobby helmet from Peggy. He starts with the helmet and has a very awkward interaction with Peggy, who seems to have feelings for him, but he doesn't reciprocate those feelings. She gives him the helmet before slamming the door in his face. Roger then goes to Viv to get the groceries and she gives it to him with no fuss. Now it was time for him to head back to Faraday's home. Once walking up to the house, an explosion goes off, worrying Roger, so he rushes to check on James. James was passed out on the floor, but was breathing. Then Roger saw Faraday get sucked into a portal. James wakes up and suggests looking around as they had to help her. After grabbing some batteries and placing them here, a secret passage opens up. Heading down to the basement, Roger tells James where he is, and James somehow shows up in the basement. I guess there was another entrance. Pressing this button, they head down into Faraday's secret laboratory until they reach the central room. Heading further down, Roger finds and equips the ray gun. It's a standard ranged weapon, so he uses it to blow up some barrels. The ray gun can also be charged for a more powerful blast. It can also be switched between ranged and melee, useful as the gun has a battery that once it's depleted, the ranged option can't be used for a few seconds until the battery recharges. Roger heads deeper into the facility, but is called back by James, who asks him to take care of a robot for him. Once the robot is down, the pair decide to split up. Roger will go search for Faraday, and James will stay in the control room to help guide Roger over the radio. Roger heads down to the power wing and triggers the security. After careful movement, Roger finds a weird machine that he can shoot at with a charge blast to power up, which opens the way forward to the security room. Here he finds an upgrade to his ray gun that makes melee hits charge his gun. After shooting more of those charges while dodging a laser wall, the security is disabled, but it also turns off the power. James tells Roger to take a nearby lift to go to the generator room. On the way, he encounters a new kind of robot, one that creates a Tesla field similar to the headmistress's. Taking the lift down, Roger does some sick parkour until he reaches the generator room. In order to turn the power on, Roger needs to fire the charged gun at the charges on the wall in correspondence to the switches. Once all three are activated, James suggests looking for Faraday in a monitoring room. While going there, Roger sees some robots fighting each other, until only one team remains, so he books it out of there. He finds another upgrade to his ray gun that makes the melee mode hits give a free charge shot. He finds a way out, and taking it up makes him reach the surface, where he witnesses a robot kill poor Vivian. This grants me an achievement, Poor Viv, for completing Act 1 of They Came From Below. Roger heads down to the village and we're back to where he started the story. Though this time, Faraday speaks from the headmistress, telling everyone to stay away from the alien robots. Roger still decides to take action and manages to save all the villagers from the invading robots, getting me another achievement, Local Hero. Roger heads back down to the house and reconvenes with James, then heads back down to the secret facility. Once back down, he decides to go search for Faraday in the research wing and takes the tram to it. Once on the other end, he beats up some robots, then finds the activator room with the doohickey, or its more proper name, the Curious device. Using it, Roger can move machines around, accessing more of the facility. With the help of the Curious device, Roger is able to move around some machines in the previous room to charge 2 chargers, allowing him to take another tram where he and James have a slight argument. Once he's off the tram, he uses the Curious device to create some platforms to parkour on, where he then takes the lift up to the sublimation vat where he fends off against some robots. After that, he finds himself in a puzzle chamber of sorts, where he uses the Curious device to make it safely across the dangers. He goes through a vent that takes him to the agricultural prototyping room, where he sees the robot rip the head off this thing, and then the robot keeps repeating the word sorrow, making Roger realize they can think and feel. Continuing forward, Roger takes another lift and finds Faraday, who tells Roger she plans on using the robots for farming as the people in Wellington Wells are running out of food. She then leaves to go to her positronic converter, so that's where Roger sets his sights on, to stop her from using it to spare the poor robots. In the room ahead, Roger finds a chrono bomb, which slows down time when used. By slowing time, Roger goes down this fan and heads to the incinerator room, where more robots attack him. By using the base game shove feature, Roger shoves 7 robots into the smelter, getting me another achievement, Helter Smelter. Once the last robot is dealt with, Roger finds another ray gun upgrade, this one allowing his shots to ricochet up to 3 times. In the same room, he activates a decommissioned robot who confirms Roger's theory that the robots are sentient, so now he's more determined to stop Faraday. Roger heads back to James, where I get the next achievement, Queen Faraday, for completing Act 2. Roger and James have another argument about how whimsical and free Roger is and how James just isn't. Roger is still set on his quest though, so begins to head to Conversion to stop Faraday. Here he rides another tram and has a memory of his past about him and James and how they care for each other. Eventually he reaches a room where a new type of robot spawns, a very tanky one. It's difficult to take down, but several charge blasts to its eye does the trick. Soon, Roger finds a room where Faraday is testing some missiles. Thankfully, these can be shot and destroyed while airborne if I was actually good at aiming at them. Once they're all down, Roger takes another tram and reaches Faraday's machine, where Faraday tries to stop him by sending in some robots. Once they're dealt with, he uses the Curious device to access the exploding barrels to destroy it. Faraday was very upset with this and decides to basically blow up every robot by igniting all the modeling, which could also blow up the mines in Wellington Wells. James then demands Roger to come back to him, so Roger does. When returning to the main room, I get the next achievement, Deprogrammed, for completing Act 3. Reuniting with James, their falling out is at an all-time high, even leading to Roger having to take down James in a fistfight, where he really hopes he isn't wrong about what he's doing. Roger grabs the final ray gun upgrade, which basically gives infinite charge. He heads down and goes to the final room, where he confronts Faraday. Faraday's first phase is able to create an electrified field, and summon a blast that needs to be dodged by hiding behind one of these structures that can be raised with a Curious device. In her second phase, she summons robots, and also force lowers the structures that require you to raise them before she does her blast. Once she reaches her third phase, she summons more robots before James comes to help Roger. He throws a bundle of shock grenades to reduce Faraday's health greatly. Faraday's also able to summon missiles in this phase. After blasting her down with the ray gun, Faraday goes down. The robots come through the portal and take Faraday to their world to be judged, then say they're closing the portals for good. Roger tries to convince them not to, and they say he could cross through the portal to try and convince their leaders to reopen the portal someday. Roger wants to go, but realizes if he fails, he'd be stuck there, leaving James alone. But James demands that he goes, even kicking him out of their house so Roger wouldn't have any reason to stay. But that isn't satisfactory to Roger, and pleads for James to come with them. In order to seal the deal, Roger kisses James, "Let's go, finally!" And this convinces him to join Roger on an unknown adventure. At the end, I get the next achievement, a smashing adventure, for completing They Came From Below. Now, there are 4 achievements I missed during my first playthrough of this DLC. The first I go and get was killing 8 robots at the start of the game. Knowing what I know now about the ray gun, this doesn't take too long, and I get the achievement, Metal Guru. The next few I'd have to get by just playing the DLC again. The first one was shooting the robots in the eyes 100 times, which just needed some better aim and a bit of time to complete. I don't actually know if there's any indication that you shoot the robots in their eyes, but eventually I got the achievement, Headmaster. The next achievement is one that's really simple to get, shooting 50 of the exploding barrels. Honestly, I'm kinda sad at myself that I didn't just explode any of these during my first playthrough, but I play how I play. So after not tactfully using any of these barrels and just shooting them on sight, I get the achievement, Shouldn't These Be Red? The final achievement is obtained by collecting all the lore notes, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't understand how this one works, as it seems like it's obtained consecutively across all playthroughs, meaning grabbing half the notes in one playthrough, then the other half in another playthrough would net you the achievement. But even after following a guide and getting every single one I missed and then some, the achievement didn't pop. After playing through the game again, I grabbed this note Stimulus, and got the achievement. But the thing is, I grabbed Stimulus in the previous playthrough. Goofiness aside, I was able to get the achievement Well Read. Nick's story begins with him in his bed after a crazy night. He turns over to a girl who had stayed the night, and she's suddenly transformed into a rat who is also Nick's agent, or ex-agent, Virgil. Bobby knocks on the door, demanding Nick to open as his room was leaking into the downstairs ballroom. As he tries to find something to clear his head, he notices blood on his shirt, not knowing how it got there. With the Bobby getting more and more frustrated, Nick blocks the door, beginning to think of a way out. Nick goes to get his gear and finds his amp, which has been damaged due to being submerged in water, though there is another as his manager stole his good one. Nick also grabs his guitar, which serves as this DLC's weapon. He can shoot musical blasts from it, which for all intents and purposes basically deals damage, and he can also vibe with it, which serves as a block. Similar to Roger's ray gun, the guitar has a battery which recharges over time, though blocking with vibe does recharge the guitar. Vibing can also be used on the golden statues of Nick to point him in the right direction, which he uses here to find his secret stash. Using vibe on some more statues, Nick finds a secret passage and uses it to get out. While trying to escape, Nick comes across one of his groupies who is stuck in a vent. Nick promises to help her out, mainly just to get away from her, and soon he finds himself against a crazed groupie. Using his guitar to face melt them, he's able to continue forward to the laundry room, where he grabs a hotel staff key to have more access to the place. With the key, he opens a room and finds a power cell, which he uses to power a vent in the laundry room, taking the vent to an elevator. From there, he finds an upgrade to his guitar, Serenade, which can be used to charm his groupies into fighting for him. By trying to figure out how it works, I accidentally got the achievement for using Serenade 30 times. Love me don't. Once dealing with the fans, Nick finds a trash chute going down it to escape the hotel. He plans on heading to his house for a change of clothes and begins heading there. On the way, a new enemy appears, one that the one that flashbangs you with the camera. After dealing with the paparazzi, Nick reaches his house, or actually a perfect replica of his house turned museum. Going up for a change of clothes, Nick finds his golden records, which he grabs to use as a makeshift weapon. Nick finds some new clothes, then hears over the PA that his personal stash was also replicated here, so he goes to grab it. Once he does, he meets up with his ex-wife who runs the museum. Suddenly, he begins to hallucinate that he's really tiny, and begins to traverse the new giant world in search of something that would fix this. He uses his golden records to press some faraway buttons to progress before finally finding some other pills, but first he faces his giant ex. By using his records, he takes her down, but thankfully it was just a compliment machine turned aggressive. Nick soon comes to his senses and snaps out of his hallucination. Stepping out of the museum, Rat Virgil talks to him again and basically forces him to get a new amp so he could remember the night before properly. The easiest way to get a new amp was buying one from the music store, but the wife of the music store owner is a huge fan of Nick Lightbearer, which upsets him, so he borrowed business from Nick, forcing Nick to steal back his good amp from his manager. So it was back to the hotel with Nick, and while at the back patio of the hotel, I get another achievement. The hits just keep on coming, for hitting 3 enemies with 1 golden record. I have absolutely zero tips how to get this easily other than just crowd a bunch of enemies together and let those records loose. Back in the hotel, Nick grabs a bellboy uniform and key which would help him blend in to get his amp. Nick then uses the PA system to lure the manager out, finally helping the poor groupie trapped in the vents. With the manager gone, Nick finds a note stating that the amp is in the manager's room, thus he begins to head there. At the hotel's lobby, this guy demands Nick to take up a constable's bag to his room, which gives Nick the perfect excuse to head up to the manager's room as well. Once up there, Nick enters the Bobby's room, where they're investigating Foggy Jack. Nick grabs some modeling strings from the Bobby's bag, which upgrades his serenade to affect 2 people at once. Nick then turns the suspicious lamp, which reveals the vent to the manager's room. He grabs his amp, which gives him a slight memory of the night before, making him realize he needs to go to the park. The amp also upgrades his guitar, giving him the ability to perform an AoE charged face melt. Nick goes back to the lobby and leaves towards the park. Through vibing, he finds his guitar pick, meaning he was here. Heading deeper into the park, Nick finds the real Virgil dead in the arms of a statue of Nick. I also get the next achievement here, 1 day in the life, for surviving day 1. Day 2 begins much like the first, with Nick waking up from his bed. He thinks it must have been all a bad dream, but once he realizes it wasn't, he decides to head to the hotel's bar. By going through the lobby, the hotel's pub had one of Nick's former bandmates, Maury Memento, who was playing the song from Nick's memory. Asking if he could play the full song, Maury says he needs the piano tuned, but the tuner was stolen by Dottie, the girl he's playing for, because she thinks it sounds better the way it is. Heading upwards to Dottie's room, Nick learned nothing and took another pill, going into another hallucination. This one really weird. Eventually it ends and he enters Dottie's room, who's actually a twin, and this is her twin Dodo. Before he can get the tuner, he needed to entertain Dodo, so to prevent himself from getting too hot, he removes his blazer and does a dance for her, which gets me another achievement, the full Nikki. Dodo isn't pleased with this and attacks, but Nick just face melts her and her crew until they go down, and this gets me another achievement, Mind Blower, for taking down 15 enemies after a charged face melt. After grabbing the tuner, Nick heads back down to the pub and gives the tuner to Maury, who plays the song. Maury tells Nick that he heard someone playing it on the roof, so that's where Nick heads next, by taking a lift in the kitchen. Atop the roof, the way forward is blocked by shocking water, and Nick traverses by turning off all the vents with his records. Once he reaches the other side, he finds a vent that takes him to a gruesome sight. The music store owner is murdered, and upon closer inspection, he finds his bellboy outfit, meaning he really was here and most definitely murdered him. I get the next achievement, B-side, for surviving day 2. Day 3 begins, again like all the others, though Nick now firmly believes he's a killer, so he decides to hide himself away. He uses the same secret passage he did on the first day and goes through some vents, falling down into the pub. He interrupts the lookalike contest where he confesses to his murdering, but nobody believes him and they attack him. During the assault, I get the achievement Great Vibrations for parrying 30 attacks with Vibe. Nick then takes a dumbwaiter to the basement where he finds a dressing room with all his things, his murderer things. Virgil talks to him, confused as to how all this hasn't jogged any of his memories, but Nick decides to go turn himself in. While taking the elevator up, it breaks and begins going down before crashing. When Nick wakes up, yeah, he's just in hell. Traveling through the underworld, Nick finds a chapel where he meets the devil, who sends him down to the hedge maze. Walking through, he meets the devil again. No, actually, it's just Foggy Jack, who openly admits to killing both Virgil and the music store owner amongst many of his fans, meaning that Nick isn't a murderer. Foggy Jack wants Nick to write him a song, who even knows why, but once Nick obviously says no, Foggy Jack just decides to kill him instead, and sends out the evil mask of evilness, which is really easily brought down by a pluck of Nick's guitar. As Nick travels the maze to find the performance stage within, Foggy Jack keeps sending both tiny versions of himself, easily destroyed by a charged face melt, and the aforementioned masks. Once Nick reaches the stage, he powers up the amps before plugging it in to take down Foggy Jack. Foggy Jack's fight sadly isn't all too interesting. He summons his evil mask, which once are taken down damage him, until he gets stunned and summons little versions of himself. He can also summon fast masks, which are just fast, and big masks, which once destroyed become a lot of normal masks. Eventually his health is depleted and Nick cranks it up to 11, bringing an end to Foggy Jack's murders and giving a new start to Nick Lightbearer's life. Assuming this all actually happened, it isn't just a limbo after Nick might have died in the events of the main story. I also get the next achievement, number 1 on the charts, for completing the Lightbearer DLC. Of course, this wasn't every achievement this DLC has to offer, though I did do a good job getting most and needed only the collectibles, which are the notes and the golden idols. Same as before, I followed a guide to obtain every single one, and I'm still not sure if it's consecutive or not because this time I got the achievements after collecting the final one. There's not much to say about this, as there's no difficult puzzle or out-of-the-box thinking to find them, you just need to explore, something I clearly lack. Eventually though, I collected the final lore note and got the achievement liner notes, soon followed by a golden idol for reviving all the statues. The final DLC begins with Victoria being interrogated by Ollie before getting freed, then running to find a mood booth. As she wanders through the streets, she begins to see just how bad everything has gotten now that she's off her joy. When she finds the booth, she comes to her senses. She just couldn't take it. The nearby Bobby realizes she has become a downer and begins to fight her. Victoria uses a whip as her main weapon, and it has several functions. She can hit enemies at a distance and can also shove enemies away with the whip, most effectively if she hits them first, then uses the shove, known as the whip shove combo. The whip can also be charged up for a more powerful attack. Victoria escapes the Bobbies by climbing through a window, but that doesn't last long as they quickly find her. To escape this time, she uses her whip to grapple upwards, getting her up to the rooftops. Once she breaks into another home, Victoria has a vision of her mother, which doesn't last long. Once she gets back into the street, she immediately goes and hides in the sewers, where, after a quick chat with her mom, she decides to pay her father a visit. She tries to tell him everything that's going on, but he shrugs it off, saying that Verloc has a solution and they just need to wait. Victoria, not really happy with her father's assessment, decides to go check up on Verloc. Victoria finds some contraptions, which are all scared about the DLC, and they give her what are essentially perk points to upgrade herself. Heading down, Victoria traverses the underside of the bridge. Once she's across, I had enough contraptions to buy the upgrade Strong Arm, which makes her whip consume 30% less stamina. At the top, she dispatches some plagued wastrels and opens the way forward. On the way to the factory, I get the next achievement, Pushover, for performing the whip shove combo 40 times. Soon she arrives at the Joy Factory, where they're unveiling their new flavor of joy, coconut. Speaking to a Bobby through the intercom, she gets inside and learns there's a scuffle going on with the employees, and decides to restore order so Verloc can do his thing. She gets into the factory proper through a wall gap where she sees a total brute walking about. She decides to turn the power back on to let the Bobby sort things out. She finds one of the switches she needs after dropping down through the ceiling, and after platforming to the other side, she drops through another ceiling and turns the second switch, which activates the security. I also grabbed the skill Don't Interrupt here, which makes her immune to stuns from electricity and gives her 50% damage resistance against electricity. After getting through Verloc's security, she heads up to the main door where the brute comes to attack her. By simply using her whip, she takes down the brute and opens up the door for the Bobbies, which gives me the achievement Factory Finish. Victoria heads up to speak with Verloc, who states that he was this close to a permanent solution, but once Victoria leaves, she talks with her mother, and both think that he's never going to have a solution. So she decides the unthinkable, cutting off the island's joy supply. On her way out of the lab, some joy doctors try to stop her, so now she'll have to worry about them as well. When she's outside, she realizes she's past curfew, so she'll have to also worry about the Bobbies. She stealths her way to the Old Bailey district, and along the way, I get the upgrade Disarming, which forces enemies to drop their weapon when hit with the whip. She eventually finds a crank to open the way to the district, then goes to do some more exploring, where she finds the alley stash key. She then finds this quarantined area, where she flips this lever that turns on the electricity in the water below, slowly zapping the enemies within. Once they're dealt with, she disables the lever and heads down, where she finds the canal's loot, getting me another achievement, Canal Retentive. Victoria heads to Brittle Path, an intersection that connects many parts of the DLC, including the Old Bailey district. Once she heads into the district, she remarks that she isn't too far away from the pill allocator. Walking for a bit, she finds poor Johnny Bolton lying on the floor unconscious. She nabs his dart gun, a weapon that shoots a reloadable electrified dart, which is able to short-circuit conductors and temporarily disable the Spanker TVs. Before heading forward, I buy an upgrade for the dart gun, Proper Conduct, which lets the whip steal and transfer electricity between enemies. I then backtrack, return to the Waterloo district, where I find the lock the alley key is used on, getting me the treasure within and another achievement, Alley Catch. Before heading back, I bought Shove Off, an upgrade that makes the whip shove always work. When she enters the pill allocator building, her mom remarks about this plan requiring a lot of faith in the people, but she still goes through with it, using the dart gun to overload the system, completely destroying it. She escapes through a vent at the second floor and heads back to Brittle Path, where she overhears two wellies talking about how they'll just get joy from the water supply. She now headed to Dunkerton, where the water treatment plant was housed, as she needed to cut off the joy from the water supply as well. Arriving at Dunkerton, she has a memory that explains she was the one that suggested putting joy in the water supply. To get to the treatment plant, she heads up and disables a downer detector, twice, before reaching the front of the building. She takes the side entrance through the vents and enters undetected. I grab some upgrades here, Silent Step, which reduces her noise when walking by 50%, and Soft Landing, which makes her falling 50% quieter and makes it deal 50% less damage. Inside the waterworks, she takes another vent and heads down to the treatment floor where Verloc was waiting for her. Verloc summons a few waves of enemies, but they're no match for Victoria, and once they're all down, she heads up and tries to close the valve. When it doesn't work, she short-circuits the nearby conductor, which works a little too well, sending her back down to the floor and forcing her to begin climbing up and out as the water rises. Eventually, she reaches the surface and exits, where she sees her plan worked and the people were off their joy. I also get the next achievement here, Tap Out, for shutting off the joy supply to the water. As she begins to head back home to lay low, she sees just how bad everything gets when people are off their joy. When she tries to head home, some bobbies stop her and take her to prison. She reflects to herself, and her mom tells her to sleep so she can remember the past. The memory in question is when she told her mom her father was taking her to England, and how her mother hoped she'd never be faced with a situation where she knows what to do but hates to do it, very much like the situation she's in now. Once Victoria wakes back up, she notices her cell was mysteriously left unlocked, allowing her to begin her escape. She finds Johnny Bolton, who thinks she's there to interrogate him, but once he learns she's on his side, he tells her his plans to blow up the Joy Factory and tells her where she could find the plans. The explosives, on the other hand, well, he planted some at her house, and if they haven't gone off yet, she could use them. Victoria knew what she needed to do, so she continued her escape, finding her equipment before booking it out of there before the bobbies could re-detain her. When she's out, her father was waiting for her, as he was the one who got the door to be unlocked. He wasn't too happy with what she did and suggests for her to stay in his safe house, which makes Victoria realize that he knew about the food shortage and did nothing. This makes her extra certain about destroying the Joy Factory, so she subs her father away and begins to head to her home to grab the explosives. Along the way, I grab Character Arc, a darkened upgrade that makes its shots affect nearby enemies. Once she reaches her house, she finds it infested with bobbies, but is able to grab the dynamite she needs, so heads to Johnny's secret lair to grab the plans. Now was off to the Joy Factory. Once she was inside, Verloc tried to stop her with his guards, but they were easily dealt with, and she planted the bombs. With them all set, she hauled herself out before the bombs could go off, but that doesn't exactly work, so she quickly heads up to the roof whilst the building begins to blow up. Once she made it to the roof, she needed to run until she was clear of the blast distance, and after several grapples with her whip, she managed to make it to a safe place and watched as the Joy Factory collapsed, bringing an end to Joy production in Wellington Wells. As she gets knocked out by rubble, she occasionally hears the aftermath of everything. People trying to find her, and Jack's last tape playing, telling everyone what's going on. Eventually, she gets up and sees that people have thrown away their happy faces, and eventually meets up with a group of people that were about to leave. They weren't pleased with her and told her they were leaving without her. Victoria then ponders about her mother, if she'd be proud about what she did, bringing into the entire story of We Happy Few and its DLCs. I get another achievement, a bright, shiny medal, for completing We All Fall Down. The remaining achievements were mostly corresponding to the collectibles, the notes and contraptions, and like the other two DLCs, I followed a guide for the ones I missed, and again, like the other DLCs, none of them were really off the beaten path too much, aside from the ones you get from the Canal and Alley. I would also be attempting this next playthrough without buying any upgrades, but honestly, there wasn't much to say about this as nothing really changed. I just avoided far more fights than normal. Soon I got the achievement for collecting all the lore notes, Bibliophile. Following this was an achievement for zapping 20 different TVs, down the tubes. The final two achievements came hand in hand. Once I completed this playthrough, I got the achievement for beating the entire DLC without upgrading at all natural, and after loading back a save before completing the DLC, I quickly bought all the upgrades available, getting me the final achievement of We Happy Few, Self-Actualized.
Well, it seems we've come to the end of our time. I do sure hope you liked our special broadcast. If you want to, subscribe to our program for more broadcasts like this in the future. Tune in again next time.